we kind of want to have this point in the middle where we can recognize emotions, because emotions are very important for empathy and sympathy. It's very important that we can put ourselves in someone else's shoes. What's more important to everyone, including yourself, as men, is how you show up. And I think what defines good, masculine, strong character is your ability to not react emotionally to things, to be able to think before you speak and think before you act.
In this whole soup of mental health, multifactorial, what are emotions then, and what are the role that they play in that? Because all of us are so governed by them, and you know, a lot of these mindfulness techniques, etc., is almost trying to not detach you from them, but interpret them better and react to them better, and so on and so forth. So, you know, almost from a physiological viewpoint, what is an emotion, and how should they be interpreted to help you achieve this kind of better state of being?
That's a very good question in terms of what is an emotion. I don't know. And I don't think that anyone really does know exactly what an emotion is. I think we know what it means to be emotional, which is when we let our feelings get in the way of our logic. And I think that maybe the opposing force to emotion is logic and reasoning. And I think that emotional regulation is something that's very important. And I think that a lack of emotional regulation can be very damaging, both in the present moment and for a long-term trajectory. I think that when we're looking at what it means to regulate the emotions, it's being in a situation going, I feel like X, but I need to do Y. I don't want to do this, but this is what I need to do. Or I really feel like doing this, but this is not good for me. This is not what I need. And being able to do that, I think, is very important in having healthy relationships with other people, because if we're not in control with our emotions, our actions essentially become like a leaf in the wind. Kind of go, oh, well, today I felt like this, so I just did whatever. And I have observed that society has become more rooted in emotionalism in this day and age than it used to be. I think sometimes we put our emotions on a pedestal. And I think that, you know, I often come back to this saying that, like, no one cares how you feel, so you shouldn't really care how you feel either. And that's not a hard viewpoint. Like, there's empathy. Empathy is important. People do care how you feel. Your family and your friends definitely care how you feel. But what's more important to everyone, including yourself, as men, is how you show up. And I think what defines good, masculine, strong character is your ability to not react emotionally to things, to be able to think before you speak and think before you act, and go, I feel this way today. I feel sad. I feel tired. I feel like this, but I have responsibilities of A, B, C, and people still care about how I feel. You know, my wife and my or if I had kids, my kids and my parents and people close to me, they don't see me as a robot, but how I feel doesn't get in the way of what I need to do. And I think that if people can logically choose what they want to do and still experience and be aware of their emotions, but not let them supersede their responsibilities, I think that's a really important path forward. And then I think when people go, well, how do I do that? It's, again, coming back to this, I think practicing martial arts and practicing meditation gives you the neurological architecture to be able to regulate the emotions.
If you've just started TRT, it is completely normal to feel overwhelmed and confused. There's a lot of new territory to cover, and there is a lot of conflicting information. I wrote TRT 101 so that you can have everything that you need to know in an instruction manual in one place that you can refer back to, that you can have all the questions answered before they even come up. TRT 101 is my best practice approach for TRT from start to finish, and it contains everything that you need to avoid all the challenges and pitfalls that I've seen come up in my clients over the last 5 years. You can check it out via the link below.
So would you say the emotion is kind of like the mental manifestation, say like a knee-jerk reaction?
Yeah.
It's kind of like how your brain very quickly interprets how you could react, but that's only going to be one viewpoint of it. So like, I don't know, say we put a sculpture here in the middle of the three of us. I'm looking at a different point to what you are. The sculpture looks different to you than it does to me. Like, the emotion is maybe one view, but then the logic is the other view, and you know, perhaps there's a third view or something there. So would it be fair to say that, you know, we shouldn't discount them, but we should look at them as like a slice of the whole reality there, and it's not a case of ignore, but think, oh, well, I could react this way, but actually in context, this isn't as meaningful as that viewpoint maybe makes it out to be.
Humans are fascinating, and I think that the fact that we have all these things and we can be aware aware of these things and then we can talk about these things is fascinating. Babies are a good example of absolutely zero emotional regulation. Slightly happy, laughing, slightly sad, crying and screaming. So I think if we look at that as the extreme, and then if we look at the other extreme of like being a complete robot and feeling absolutely nothing, that would kind of be a sociopath. We kind of want to have this point in the middle where we can recognize emotions, because emotions are very important for empathy and sympathy. It's very important that we can put ourselves in someone else's shoes and go, how would I feel if someone spoke to me the way that I'm speaking to them? I think that's very important for mature relationships. Otherwise, you're not going to get very far and no one's going to like you very much if you can't empathize. But I think when it comes to, and I've spoken about this in terms of trauma as well, it's like we have to be able to see emotions, feel emotions, embody emotions, experience emotions, but also be able to put them to the side and go, I'm going to make room for this. I'm not going to suppress this. I'm not going to, bottle this up and then, take it all out on someone who doesn't deserve it in the future. But I have the conscious maturity as an adult to be able to put this aside and then choose how I'm going to show up. And that process is not easy. And it's probably not something that even people who think they've mastered it get right 100% of the time. But it's something where the strength of your character is demonstrated and challenged under highly stressful situations. And it's in those situations where the going's tough and it's pouring rain, how you show up in those situations when your emotions could get the best of you, I think that's the best test of your character.
Sure. So why do you think then, you mentioned about society becoming more emotionally driven, what do you think is kind of pushing that?
All the wokeism nonsense. I think that it comes back to the kind of the mental health stuff that we were talking about before, is that if we allow our emotions to be an excuse for things, and if we allow emotionalism to be an excuse for things, we absolve responsibility. If we go, oh, well, I was meant to stick to my meal plan and I was meant to go to the gym 5 days a week, but I felt sad, so I didn't do it. And instead I went and had a pizza and, just went to bed and just chilled out and did nothing. That's not okay. That's not acceptable. And I think that the idea that it is for people who maybe aren't doing well and who lack the resilience and lack the perseverance, it's a pretty sweet get out of jail free card. If we can go, hey, emotions are so important that they're now an excuse for be able to do whatever I want, say whatever I want, whatever. I think for someone who's not doing well, that sounds pretty sweet. And I think that that's why this narrative is becoming more popular, is more and more people aren't doing well. And we're going, oh, this is the solution. And it's going, well, this sounds pretty appealing, because I think the other solution, which is the stuff that, we've been talking about so far, everything from, hormone optimization, diet optimization, lifestyle optimization, habits, all of this stuff, and objectively improving self through rigorous ongoing self-development, that's a whole bunch of work. And I think that this pathway is this is the path of least resistance. This is appealing to that mammalian hindbrain, which is going, this sounds like a sweet get out of jail free card. I think that's why we're going down that path. And I think that without going too rabbit holey, I think that this population is a easier to control, more subservient population than this population.
So should the focus instead be not on the emotion itself, but your reaction and action that takes place in the midst of them?
Absolutely. Everything is about how you respond. How we show up and how we survive is ultimately who we are as people. And I think it's always in the response. I felt like this, but I did this anyway. That's commendable and respectable.
Cool.
Isn't that most of life, though? I mean, it's, I guess I got a different view kind of on that, because most of what I've ever done or will do involves kind of me not wanting to do it. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't. It still has to be done anyhow, because the ultimate accountability is going to fall back, on did I do it or did I not do it, and it doesn't really make any difference how I feel about it.
Exactly.
It still has to get done.
Yep.
That's if it's business, family, training, or whatever it's going to be. I think the whys are probably better anchored. Where when looking at younger generations, say my kids as an example, trying to anchor that's tough, right? Because they're in their 20s. Like, how the fuck do you know what you want to do? right? So we have all these conversations about purpose, why, or all the other different words that we kind of want to put out there to kind of explain that. They don't fucking know. You know, they're still just figuring shit out. Where that's kind of where the ideology falls into that. You know, so if my one son's in the military, he really doesn't have to really worry about that because his service circumcedes everything after that. Right? So he's got to be willing to die for the country, and that's more important than his fucking emotions.
Yeah.
You know, that's kind of implanted because of the environment that he's in. I think it's kind of going back to what I said before, where people are in certain ideologies that will kind of cover that if you're in school, if you're in college, or whatever it's going to be. But then when they're out on their own, they're thrown into this real world, and they're like, what the fuck am I here for? Right? And if religion's not part of that whole thing, and the military or whatever ideology is not there, they got to create their own ideology. You know, or they're not going to do that, right? They're going to fall into some other type of ideology with that. But all of them that I feel are productive are going to be ones that create the greatest amount of self-accountability.
Exactly.
Because then you have control, right? Fail or not fail. And you're going to fail more than you're going to succeed. And I think that's kind of a lost thing that's in there, where we see that in the weight room, right? All the time. You know, most of what we do in the weight room, if not all of it, is kind of like not doing what you wanted to do. You know, I don't want to say failing, because people will take that as taking every set to failure, which, you know, that's not really what I mean. But you're all in there for some purpose, which isn't going to be realized until, you know, later time, which means that one session in the gym, you failed because you didn't achieve that said purpose, because that's going to come later than that. It needs to be applied to all these other things. But when it comes to trying to figure out, you know, and I've always been conflicted on this since the very first book came out of Determine Your Why, or whatever it was, I forget the author, but that's when it became a huge talking point, and it just kind of, you know, trends up and down. Now is, how do people discover that? You know, especially if you're working with somebody that is in their 20s. You know, it's, and even if you're older, I mean, there's a lot of times like, why in the fuck am I still doing what I'm doing? You know, so it's never, I think part of it is it's never absolute. Where I think people think it needs to be this absolute thing, where it's always there and it's always a drive, and you always want to get up super early to be able to get this thing done, and it's all that. Where to me, it's more of it's an overreaching objective. That may not have the same vision at certain periods of time. You know, sometimes it's going to be very clear. Other times it's going to be very cloudy. But it's still kind of always there. Where that's where I see the issue with the younger generation is they know what they're supposed to do. Like, they're trying to figure it out, but they're lost.
Do you think a lot of that comes down to, though, being you know, encouraging people to be introspective and just being like, well, what actually gives you fulfillment or happiness as opposed to pleasure? You know, like, for example, with me,
they're going to say Doritos and video.
Okay, I get. But at least if you're aware of the concept, then as you're going through those developmental stages, you kind of can start to tune into like what gives you immediate pleasure versus what makes you feel fulfilled.
Well, what I wonder is, I mean, if we go through, you know, our backgrounds, we kind of like fucked up and found out. You know, is that necessary? You know, so we can try to explain all this, but, you know, without the circumstances that we've all been through, we may not have that same clarity. And a lot of them circumstances were not good, you know, to be able to do that. Where at the same time, you don't want to tell people, go do really bad shit, you know, because it's going to provide more clarity on your life.
But I think the thing we probably all share in common is at some point or at various points, we took a step that maybe we didn't feel ready for, or we thought that maybe was beyond us, or that this is going to test me. I think probably everyone who ends up in the right place, you know, or is in line with their goals or their purpose, whatever, probably at some point has had to go, oh, well, that means I need to give up the career I've just been to college for, or, you know, take on a job role that I don't really think I've got the skill set for, or something like that. You know, like, if it scares you a little bit, then maybe that tells you all you need to know, perhaps. And that's what do you think about that?
I think it's exactly what you said, is that, you know, to get to where you've gotten to is an outcome of doing a whole bunch of shit that you didn't want to do, and you did it anyway. And that mentality is absolutely what is lacking in a whole bunch of people who aren't doing well, because they don't have that skill set. And this ability to be able to do it anyway, even though you don't want to do it, the way that I instilled that into myself. So when I was going through rehab for my brain injury, once I realized that there was a path forward with rehabilitation and testosterone and peptides altogether, it was about 8 to 10 hours a day of just horrible physical rehabilitation for the best part of a year. I had never done anything hard in my life up until that point. And I was looking basically down, it was either that or suicide. And I tried this, and this is much more difficult than people realize. And I realized I couldn't do that either. So I had my back against the wall and I had to go down this path forward. And I realized I didn't have a strong male role model who had, showed me this path forward. I didn't have the actual skill set to go through this. I was basically looking down this rite of passage being like, this is make or break, but there's literally no other option than to just plow forward and do it. And through that process, I learned exactly what you talked about there, which is this ability to be able to just do what you need to do, even though you don't want to do it, because that's just life and that's just what you have to do. And that process taught me so much that has allowed my life ever since then to feel infinitely easier, because I went through something that was so objectively difficult. But this whole idea of needing to do the things that you don't want to do because you want to be the guy who did that, I try to teach my clients to go, if let's say you're going to go out to a restaurant with all your buddies and, it's like a burger place or whatever, and there's a bunch of stuff on the menu. The pleasure of breaking your diet and having the double cheeseburger and the fries and the fucking milkshake or whatever, that's going to feel good for the mouth pleasure. And then you're going to feel like shit afterwards. You're going to feel ashamed. You're going to feel embarrassed to yourself because you didn't keep your word to yourself. But going out and going, no, I'm going to stick to the menu. I'm going to get some maybe grilled chicken and a salad or whatever it is you're going to get. That might not feel good at the time in terms of mouth pleasure, but if you can derive pride and if you can derive, I am the guy who does what he needs to do, not what he wants to do, because I am that guy and I am able to stick to my guns to be able to be the person who I want to be, that mental conditioning, I think, can derive even more pleasure and more happiness than having the cheat meal can.
I think when it comes to testosterone, you want to get the optimal benefits of testosterone, and testosterone will continue to become more optimal for you until you take too much. There's not a lot that's changed in injectable dosing for testosterone in the last few years. It puts most people in a ballpark, but it's not right. So the thing that blew me away at the Olympia, like I've been in an echo chamber for a long time of people who are